Of you all are now standing here in front of me, and you are looking east, or at least tacitly east. According to my compass on my smartphone, the east is in that direction. I brought you back here into the woods. We're going to start out focusing a little bit on the role of Scribner's brigade. You can see their tablet for this phase of the action located there. This brigade of Ohio and Indiana soldiers, with a few Michiganders thrown in for seasoning, is commanded by an Indianan by the name of Benjamin Franklin Scribner, or Frank Scribner. There's a wartime photograph of him after he has been promoted to brigadier general. At this time, he is still only the colonel of the 38th Indiana. Scribner has under his command one regiment more than is typical in brigades here. He has 5 infantry regiments as opposed to the standard 4 within a brigade. And a couple of the regiments in his brigade are amongst the earliest of the Civil War regiments for the state of Ohio. It includes the 2nd Ohio. That regiment, or at least the version of it that is with him here, is the version that was reorganized after Lincoln's initial call for troops for just 90 days. When Lincoln, in April of 1861, had called for troops for 90 days, the state of Ohio organized a number of regiments, including the 2nd Ohio, and this regiment was sent to the east, and they actually will fight at the Battle of First Manassas, or Bull Run, in July of 1861. But as their 90 days run out, they go back to Ohio. The bulk of the men will then re-enlist, and the regiment will be reorganized, continue to bear the name of the 2nd Ohio, but they reorganize as a 3-year regiment. And so some of these men in this regiment are amongst the very first to enlist in the cause of preserving representative government on the face of the earth. Another early regiment, also created in 1861, is the 33rd Ohio. Its number is a little bit higher, but that higher number reflects the organization of troops in that summer of 1861, immediately after those first battles, when it was suddenly realized that the war was not going to be short. And so Lincoln is authorized by Congress to call for additional troops. The state that call is prorated to the different states. Ohio organizes more units, and the 33rd Ohio is one of those. So it also includes some very early enlistees. Those 2 regiments also will be involved in some of the very first campaigns of 1862. And in fact, the 2nd and 33rd Ohio are amongst the troops involved in the first real Union threats towards Chattanooga in 1862. When, with the fall of Fort Henry and Donelson and the loss of Nashville, Union troops occupy Nashville and Middle Tennessee, and under Ormsby McKnight Mitchell pushed down into Huntsville, Alabama. The 2nd and 33rd Ohio are part of Mitchell's force and will occupy Huntsville on September the 11th, 1862. Now, some of you all might immediately start to think, Mitchell, Middle Tennessee, seizure of Huntsville, April 11, 1862. What happens on the next day, April 12, 1862? Sheila, Reb?
The great tree.
The great locomotive chase, the Andrews Raid. And in fact, the Union soldiers given to the civilian James Andrews to try to infiltrate into Confederate territory to disrupt the vital Western Atlantic Railroad, those 22 soldiers and one civilian associated with one of those regiments, those men come from the 3 regiments of Joshua Sill's brigade, the 2nd, 21st, and 33rd Ohio. And in fact, even though that raid was unsuccessful, and the Confederates captured all the Andrews Raiders and tried and executed some of them and imprisoned the others until they escaped or were exchanged back to the north, being debilitated by their imprisonment. Some of the Andrews Raiders have returned to their regiments, the 2nd and 33rd Ohio. Another one of the regiments in Scribner's brigade, that 33rd Ohio, includes members of the Andrews Raid Party. And there's another distinction to the members of the Andrews Raid Party. What are members of that party first awarded?
The Medal of Honor.
Yep. And in fact, the very first man to receive a Medal of Honor in our nation's history is this man right here, young Jacob Parrott, a private at the time of the Andrews Raid or the Great Locomotive Chase, a member of the 33rd Ohio. As a part of the award of the Medal of Honor, the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, asked that he be promoted to 2nd lieutenant, and he is, and that's how you see him pictured here as a 2nd lieutenant. He struggled, imagine going from private to 2nd lieutenant. After having that is often said. So yes, Parrott struggles at being a 2nd lieutenant, particularly after having missed about a year's experience after having been captured and imprisoned, where he was beaten by the Confederates in the first days of his imprisonment, endured the hardships. He actually tried to resign in the summer of 1863. But other officers in the 33rd Ohio saw the merit in this young man, and they will do one of the most important things any leader can do for the organization, and that is take young potential leaders under their wing and mentor them. And Parrott did not resign. And he is actually here in Scribner's brigade with his company once again on this very ground that we will be talking about this morning. Here's 2 photographs of his medal. I'll pass that around. The brigade also includes a Wisconsin regiment and a Michigan artillery battery and another Ohio infantry regiment. So it's a mixed formation. Scribner himself is a very diligent officer, but also an officer who's finding his service in the field a little bit of a challenge. He suffers from hay fever. It is now what? Late summer. And guess what there's an awful lot of in these uncultivated agricultural fields? Ragweed and other things that are going to exaggerate that. And he, this is before the day of any of those over-the-counter medicines that you can take. And he's got terrible sinus problems. It's affecting his eyes. He's even wearing some really heavy, almost goggle-like dark glasses to try to protect his eyes and deal with the effects of the hay fever. Down in McLemore's Cove on September the 11th, when the brigade is in the near engagement down there, as he moved through the woods leading his brigade, a limb swept the glasses or goggles off of his face. And so he felt they were so important to his ability to continue to command that he dismounted to try to search for them. And he calls to some of his soldiers, and they actually make a search, and they finally find his goggles. But imagine he's leading this brigade in that condition. Well, they will, beginning on September the 17th, they're going to march up out of McLemore's Cove, and they are part of Absalom Baird's division, which is the lead division that makes that most critical all-night march of George Thomas's 14th Corps on the evening of September the 18th through the night and into the early morning hours of September the 19th, and they arrive along the Lafayette Road at the Kelly Farmstead, at what they come to call the Kelly Crossroads, the south end of the Kelly Field, right there by where the Kelly cabin is today. They arrive there at about dawn on September the 19th, having made one of those marches that the infantry hates. If infantry soldiers would prefer to be driven to where they have to go, but if infantry soldiers have to march, if they know they've got to march 5 miles or 10 miles or 20 miles, they want to do what? Get the march over with and done. They don't want to march, as these fellows wind up having to do, marching a couple of 100 yards and then standing for 5 or 10 or 20 minutes while the road cleared ahead, and then marching a short distance more and then standing and waiting for the road to clear. And it's cold that night, and the roads are dusty as a result of the drought, and as they move, they drive that dust into the air that only irritates further the mouths and throats and nose of the soldiers, and it's getting cold. Somebody along that march column said, "We'll provide some light and heat by setting the fences along the road on fire." But that only produced what? Smoke. More smoke, as the men make this terrible slow march. But about dawn, they arrive along the Lafayette Road at the Kelly Field, and Baird will deploy his division. Initially, the division is deployed across the Lafayette Road, facing south towards Tom Crittenden's 21st Corps down at Lee and Gordon's Mill. They've extended by this night march the Union left flank another 3 to 4 miles northward. And it's soon thereafter, John Brannan's division marches in and deploys on their left in the north end of the Kelly Field and up towards the McDonald Farm where the visitor center is today. And then there is firing heard out to the east. It's the firing between Dan McCook and Forrest men around Jay's Mill. And George Thomas gets word from Dan McCook that there is one lone Confederate brigade out near Jay's Mill and Reed's Bridge. And Reed's Bridge has been burned, and this lone brigade can be captured. And George Thomas decides to send troops out to try to do that. And those troops are going to come from Brannan's division, which gives Baird's men a little more time to finish boiling some coffee and warming some food that morning for breakfast. But with the sound of the fighting out to the east of them, the division is reoriented, so it now faces eastward in the Kelly Field, looking towards the sound of the fighting. And as Brannan's men marched out and became engaged, orders come for Baird's division to move out as well. Now, Absalom Baird's division does include Benjamin Scribner's brigade, but it also includes 2 other brigades. The 2nd Brigade under John Starkweather, 4 regiments, and the regular brigade of the Army of the Cumberland, the 15th, 16th, 18th, and 19th United States Infantry under John King. And when Baird's division forms up to march out to the east, they form up in the standard formation of the Union Army of the Cumberland at this time, based on Casey's tactics. They deploy 2 brigades up to the front, and that's going to be King on the front left and Scribner on the front right, and Starkweather's brigade is deployed behind them, essentially straddling them behind. They're deployed in depth or as a reserve so that they can then be shifted to the left or right as needed. And within each brigade is deployed with basically half of the brigade's strength in a front line and the other half of the brigade's strength in a second line. That gives each brigade commander a little bit of reserve. And Scribner will do this as well. He will, basically he's going to wind up deploying his three of his regiments in the front line. On his left front, the 2nd Ohio, in his center, the 33rd Ohio, and on his right front, his own regiment, the 38th Indiana. Now, at the initial formation and movement, the 38th Indiana is not on the right front because he had assigned them to support or be readily available to support the artillery battery, Battery A, 1st Michigan Light Artillery, if need be. But as they start moving eastward, the 38th Indiana will move up to become the right front of the brigade. The other two regiments, the 10th Wisconsin is in the second line on the right, and the 94th Ohio is in the second line on the left side. And the artillery battery initially is told to stay in Kelly Field, but then Baird and Scribner get some information, and the Battery A, 1st Michigan Light Artillery under George Van Pelt is ordered to follow the brigade into the woods, and will indeed begin moving into the woods as well. And so now Baird's division is marching out to the sound of the guns. Fighting that has begun out to the east of where we are right now. Scribner writes a memoir, and he writes of that morning of September the 19th that after Thomas has been told by McCook about the supposed lone brigade, Thomas is going to order Brannan's division out. Accordingly, Brannan, with 2 brigades, came along and passed over our left, and one of the brigades advanced into the woods and soon engaged the enemy. The noise of battle increasing, the other brigade of Brannan's division went in, and now the roar of musketry and artillery made it significant that Bragg had massed a large force on our left to cut us off from the roads leading to Chattanooga, and that the rebel brigade that McCook referred to was but a small portion of this force. Our division was now ordered to enter the fray on Brannan's right. My brigade was on the right of the division. Where the roads forked, I left my battery with the regiment to guard it and move forward in 2 lines. We soon met the enemy and pushed upon him and drove him handsomely. I was cautioned about firing to the right, lest I should fire into our own men. The enemy still yielded to our steady advance. Another staff officer rode up and informed me that we connected with Palmer on the right. I was advancing with our right refused, but we now straightened our line. This was bringing the 38th Indiana up onto the front line. And as the ground became more suitable for artillery, my battery was ordered up, and the regiment left with it. We still continued to press the enemy back, stepping over their dead and wounded, and taking prisoners as we progressed. At length, we came to a rail fence in front of an open field, the Winfrey field, George Winfrey's cornfield, which today is just about the exact size that it was in 1863. I'll say a little bit more about the size of the field itself, a little bit later on. The field had gotten a little bit too large, and we have planted some trees and allowed other trees to grow up. So the younger trees that you see right here immediately in our front are being allowed to grow up and to reforest that part of the field to get it back to its proper size. but the open grassy part of the field now today is basically the same size as it was in 1863. And so now Scribner's brigade has marched out, the 2nd Ohio to the left, the 33rd Ohio here in the center, and the 38th Indiana on the right. Coming back behind, the 10th Wisconsin, and the 94th Ohio with the battery coming up as well. Now, King's regular brigade has actually made a little bit further progress. What Confederates have they encountered? They have encountered some of those Confederates who have been battling with Cruxton's brigade at Jay's Mill. Most specifically, they have encountered men of Claudius Wilson's Georgia Brigade. That is the first Confederate infantry to enter this part of the fight. The 33rd Ohio, in their regimental report, will write, and in that order, we might be unmasked and hold a position on their left. The brigade obliqued rapidly to the left, and in the meantime, the 2nd Brigade, Starkweather's brigade, fell to our rear, thus leaving our right entirely unprotected. Unless, as was reported, Palmer was really there. The enemy having disappeared from our front, the brigade halted near a cornfield, and the lines readjusted. The 33rd will then be wheeled to the right. Onto this ground, the trees here would have been thin enough that they could clearly see the cornfield, the stacked rail fence around the field. The 2nd Ohio has actually gotten at least some of its elements a little bit further to the front. They, in the woods, encountered a Confederate artillery section, 2 guns. Guns of Howe's Georgia battery, and they had fired a volley and killed most of the horses of one of the guns. And they'd actually gotten troops on the gun, but with most of the animals dead, they can't actually bring the gun off of the battlefield as a trophy. But their sudden appearance on the left flank of Wilson's Georgia Brigade, which had passed from the south to the north, is going to force Wilson to withdraw off to the southeast, and somewhat of a lull settles over this part of the battlefield. This success created some enthusiasm within Scribner's brigade. The Confederates will try to counterattack there from the east. He'll begin to shift his position just a little bit. I called out to Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell of the 2nd Ohio. "Maxwell, do you see that?" Meaning the Confederate counterattack. The colonel, radiant with delight, replied, "I see it," and made a dash for the battery, and which will then quickly speed away. We were now very happy. Colonel Moore of the 33rd Ohio, elated with satisfaction, said to me, "They can't fight us. The bloody 1st, meaning the 1st Brigade of Baird's division, is too much for them." In this congratulatory state of mind, my brigade surgeon approached me with dismay in his face. I addressed him brusquely. "What's the matter, Dr. Miller?" He replied, "I have been in the hands of the enemy." I rejoined, "What do you mean?" He answered, "I mean to say that the enemy is in your rear and on your right. They have taken my field hospital with all the wounded. They have captured Captain de Buren, the provost guard, and all of the prisoners that we had captured and sent to the rear, and are coming down upon us like a pack of wolves." The shock of these words and their dreadful import can be better imagined than described. Bracing myself up to meet the impending crisis, every staff officer was dispatched in a different direction. One to Palmer, who he thought was on his right, one to Baird, one to Thomas, one to Reynolds, one to Johnson, and to anyone who ought to have the information. I asked for help and directed my staff to say that I would hold my position until reinforcements came, for the division ammunition train was parked near the place where I had initially left the battery and was in peril. Lieutenant Duvall proceeded to the right to caution Palmer and came suddenly upon the rebel lines. With much self-possession, he concealed his knowledge of their presence and, sidling off, got away and reported to General Thomas the situation, who ordered him to direct any troops he met to my support. I gave the command, first order of battle, face to the right. Within the brigade, they've created some standard battle drills to respond to potential threats. And the enemy on the right opened fire. The fire from the woods beyond the open field also renewed, and one of my regiments on that front was held to reply to it. The brigade proceeded to execute the command as if on drill, and as the battery came swinging into position in the new front, I called out to Van Pelt that if he could not place the whole battery, to place a section. He was confident that he could bring the whole battery to bear. And now the conflict began. Now, with suddenly a threat appearing on his right, because Palmer's division was not there. One brigade of Palmer's division had been there, but they have been withdrawn, and there was no protection to his right. And there now are Confederates approaching from that direction. Confederates who don't know that Baird's division is here. They literally are marching from south to north towards the sound of the guns, towards the sound of the fight that had been here between Forrest and Brannan, and then with Wilson and Ector joining in. But as they march up from the south, they're suddenly coming in on the exposed right flank of Scribner's brigade. Now the real serious threat is where? To their right. And now Scribner is going to try to react quickly to that. His left front regiment, the 2nd Ohio and the 33rd Ohio, are going to be wheeled in that direction to try to turn towards meeting that threat. His right front regiment, the 38th Indiana, is going to wheel to be able to face to the south as well. And his right rear regiment, the 10th Wisconsin, is going to wheel in that direction. Change front. Deploy now so that they are facing south. And even though we can't move exactly as those troops did in making their redeployment, let's see if we can at least, as a mass, reorient so that we can face the approaching enemy from the south. And many of you all, again, facing off to the east, but where's the enemy now coming from? From the south. They have to now turn to the south. And the 10th Wisconsin is going to do that. They are going to reorient their line of battle so that they are deployed facing to the south. And they will do so. The veterans in the state of Wisconsin will erect this marker to the 10th Wisconsin. And they're going to deploy on this ground facing to the south. Now what did Scribner tell Van Pelt? If he couldn't deploy the whole battery, to deploy a section of it? Well, and they've got to do this very quickly, as they are now turning to meet this new threat, there was not enough time to get the spacing, the alignment correct. And ideally, it would have been that there would be enough space between the 38th Indiana over here to the left and the 10th Wisconsin to the right, and the battery would have been in between them. But there's only a short space between the 10th Wisconsin's left and the right of the 38th Indiana, a space that is about the width of 2 to 3 of the gun, or the deployment of the guns of the battery. Half, or even a little bit more than half of the battery lines up behind the 10th Wisconsin. They, as they are turning, see that there's a crest in the ground. and they're going to wind up on the crest over there. The left of the battery is actually opposite the few-yard gap between the right of the 38th Indiana and the left of the 10th Wisconsin. But the rest of the battery is behind the 10th Wisconsin. Now, it was regular practice for infantry to support artillery batteries. But where, if you were the infantry and you were tasked to support an artillery battery, where do you want to be? Behind the guns. But in this emergency situation, with the enemy coming up from the south, now they've only had enough time to redeploy like this. How are you going to unmask the guns so they can fire? You have the soldiers lay down. And to the 10th Wisconsin, the command went to the rear in open order, march. The rear rank will step back 4 or 5 paces, and then the command is given, lie down. And literally, the soldiers lay down. But when they had marched out from Kelly Field, they were told they were going out to support Brannan's division, which was then engaged. They were not expecting to immediately, not this quickly, go into action. And so guess what they still had on their backs as they now redeploy? Their knapsacks. The situation is so critical at this moment that they simply now will lay down with their knapsacks. But what do you notice about the ground? It's sloping down. Look how it gets a little bit higher back here. It's sloping down, and notice how it gets lower here. This is where it'd be really great if we had the actual visibility down through the woods. The ground is sloping down, and as these soldiers lay down on the ground, what happened to their knapsack? It sticks up, and it also rides up on their back. Now, can you load and fire a muzzle-loading rifled musket from the ground?
Not easily.
Not easily. Particularly, to reload it, you got to be able to roll over. But in doing that, what are you doing? Rising up. Yep. But the men of the 10th Wisconsin are going to have that experience. One of those men is Augustus Bratnauber. Early in the morning of the 19th, we were moved to the front again and directly behind a line of battle that was then in action. The bullets were whistling and shells were flying over us. And we expected to be pushed into the fight at any minute. Not a man had been hit yet. Soon our battery passed in front of us on the run, and we were ordered to follow. They drew up in line, and we were ordered directly in front of it and ordered to lie down. This was called, and he put it in quotes, supporting the battery. We then had our knapsacks on and were lying down at full length on our faces with heads downhill. Everybody felt that this was wrong, as we could not roll over to reload in that condition. Soon the battery began firing. The concussion of the guns was terrific, and we were fairly bumped against the ground at every discharge. Directly our skirmishers were driven in, and we saw the enemy coming out of the timber across the ravine, the low ground, in front. Then the cannon began in earnest, but as we could see plainly, they were firing too high. On the rebels came 3 double lines deep. Then they charged after the front line fired. The next line passed through them. Then the first line reloading as they came on, and so on. We had orders to wait for the command before firing, and we did. Our fire fairly stunned them. But as we could not roll over to reload without rising up, having the old muzzleloaders then, the artillery horses will mostly be shot early in the attack, and we had to retreat and lost our battery right there. They got that one volley off and shocked the Confederates in their front. But then to be able to reload. They are not going to be able to fire a concerted volley or second concerted volley against the Confederates. But even if they had, even if there had been enough space to have had the guns on the front line and the men not having to lay down to fire, it's not likely that the 10th Wisconsin would have been able to stop the Confederates indefinitely. Because unknown to them, the Confederate line advancing against them is a long line. It extends well to their left front and to their right front. And there is no one on their right. The 2nd Brigade, Starkweather's brigade, is back to the rear here. And what's going to be the real problem for the 10th Wisconsin is not laying down, not the enemy directly in front, but Confederates are going to pass their right flank and turn their right flank and force them out of this position in that means. All right. Questions or observations here? Yes, ma'am.
Is that a real backpack?
Well, this is the type of knapsack the U.S. Army was using, having adopted it shortly before the Civil War. And this is the type of knapsack that these Union soldiers would have been wearing. It's painted canvas, and it is designed to carry just the bare minimum. And in fact, the Rosecrans, to reduce the weight that the soldiers are carrying on the campaign, has ordered the men to reduce what they carry in their knapsack. And it was designed to this compartment, this portion here is where the blanket is carried. You would fold the blanket up as I have here, and they were to carry one wool blanket in their knapsack. They were also to carry their gum blanket or poncho, a piece of cotton cloth that has been treated with rubber to provide a little bit of weather protection, and their shelter half, a piece of canvas with buttonholes and buttons on it, and 2 or more soldiers would button these together to create a little tent. Today we would call it a pup tent. This was something new to the Union Army, and the soldiers called it the dog tents. And there are quite a few instances where they were first issued. The soldiers set them up and felt that they were like dogs in a doghouse, and some of them expressed their opinion of the new shelter tents by getting down on their hands and knees and sticking their head and arms out and barking as the officers rode by. And then in the compartment here, carry an extra shirt, an extra pair of socks, maybe a few personal items like a tester. But that's really all that they have been allowed to carry on the campaign. And again, remember the campaign begins in the summertime when the temperature is warm, and also the Rosecrans wanted to reduce the weight that they were carrying, but he also wanted to reduce the likelihood that soldiers would throw things away on a long march, so that's why he was so specific about what they could carry. Now this will come back to haunt them in the siege of Chattanooga when it gets cold in the fall and they need more clothing and materials. I've taken them off, but the strap, there was up here, there are places where you could strap your overcoat, but none of them would have been carrying their overcoat, although they would have wished for it in October and November.
Ben,
Yes.
where would Ben Tell himself have been, or has he died by this time?
No, he's not dead yet. So,
Okay.
we'll see him in just
He
a
might
second.
be back at the
Okay.
visitor center right now.
Run back for a drink of water. Okay.
And who were the Confederates coming this way?
Well, this is Liddell's division, and it is Walthall's Mississippi Brigade and Govan's Arkansas Brigade, and We're getting towards the left of Walthall's brigade and the right of Govan's Arkansas brigade, but this is still Mississippians right in here. So, but we'll hear more about them in just a minute.
Jim, when the regular brigade gets their flank turn, is that about this time?
No, it happens just a few minutes later, because if you think again, you've got Scribner here, and then King here, and King gets out in front. The Confederates are coming up from this direction, so they're going to deal with Scribner first, and then Starkweather and King. And Govan is mostly going to deal with Starkweather over here. The center and right of Walthall is going to deal with King off in that direction.
So the Confederate line extends quite a ways back that way.
Right, yes, yeah. And we'll get a little better sense of the Confederate line in just a couple minutes. Well, we're not going to be able to go exactly the right way, but the 10th Wisconsin's line is going to be peeled out of here from right to left. So we're going to go back this way, and they're going to try to get out of here, and they're going to head that way. We'll do that. We have to zigzag a little bit differently, though. Deployed along here, 6 Model 1861, 2.9-inch Parrott rifles. They have maneuvered down through the woods. When the cannon was hooked to the limber and drawn by the 6 horses, that vehicle, the 6 horses in 3 pairs, the limber and the cannon, that vehicle is 14 yards long, and it is multi-jointed. You've got the lead pair of horses, the swing pair of horses in the center. Each of those are essentially one jointed component of this multi-jointed vehicle. And then you have the wheel horses, which are on either side of the pole of the limber, trying to weave through the woods or forests. Well, as the battery now is attempting to deploy, they deploy on the crest of or on the ground right here. And even more so than the 10th Wisconsin, guess what they did not notice about the ground? That it was dropping down. And just a few yards down through the vegetation where we were in front of the 10th Wisconsin marker, the ground reaches the low ground. We walked over it on our way here. I'll try to point that out as we go back in a few minutes. But when the Confederates first came into view, they are coming over the crest of the rise near where you're parked, where the picnic area is. And they came over that rise. And what the battery did not notice was that the ground dropped down and then rose back up again. And when they first saw the Confederates, they are higher on the slope on the other side of the low ground. And the battery opens fire. And they're going to get 64 rounds off. But what they did not see was how the ground sloped down. And so as immediately upon opening fire, the Confederates continue to move forward, but as they do, they're going downhill. And all of a sudden, where are most of the 64 rounds that this battery fires going? Over the heads of the Confederates. And they'll impact into the trees and have little effect on the attacking Confederates. The volley of the 10th Wisconsin will stun the Confederates for just a couple of moments. The 38th Indiana will do the same thing. But since the Confederate line extends beyond the right of the 10th Wisconsin, Confederates are going to lap around the end of the 10th Wisconsin. And as they do, they of course can hear the firing of the cannon, but they can suddenly see the mass of horses that pull the battery. Because each one of these 6 guns is pulled by that team of 6 horses. And then accompanying each gun is a caisson pulled by 6 more horses. And they're supposed to be deployed at intervals of 14 yards between the guns. But they were probably a little bit closer together here given the nature of the terrain. And then you have officers and sergeants who were mounted as well. Van Pelt is the battery commander is on a horse. This is a vast mass of materiel. A Civil War artillery battery properly deployed on the battlefield with the 14-yard spacing between the guns and with the caissons, it's going to occupy nearly the same area as the playing surface of a modern football field. For a Union 6-gun battery, if you were to put the right gun on one end zone and extend the battery at the proper 14-yard interval, you would be down to within the 20 on the other end of the field. And if you put the muzzles of the guns on 1 yard line, you would, the back of the caissons would be on the yard line on the other side. So think of an artillery battery as covering almost the same area as the playing surface of a modern football field. Well, those Confederates here see the battery and they open fire. And very quickly, they're going to kill and injure a significant number of the battery's horses. And outflanking the battery, they're going to come in and they're going to capture 5 of the 6 guns. Only 1 of the 6 guns is going to get limbered up and out of here. Van Pelt tries to defend his battery as best as possible, and he will be killed in the fighting as well. Van Pelt's battery falls to the Confederates on this line. The battery's position once was marked with cannon. You can find here the stones that once supported the guns, or at least this one gun, and there are 3 holes over here. But this National Military Park was raided in the late 50s, early 60s to get cannon for what I call the Johnny-come-lately Civil War battlefields. Places like Wilson's Creek and Pea Ridge and Kennesaw and Fredericksburg, in preparation for the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the Civil War. Those new battlefields were wanting cannon, and the Park Service decided that they would take cannon from here to those other battlefields. We lost about 50 guns to what I call the Johnny-come-lately Civil War battlefield sites. And I haven't been able to get any 10-pound Parrots back yet to put back here.
Why'd they give away all of the guns from here? Why'd they keep a couple of them?
There's no explanation. In your time, Rebel, there have been guns there, but the cluster of guns for Smith's Battery I, 4th U.S. Artillery, and Church's Battery D, 1st Michigan Light Artillery, north of Reedsbridge Road, on Vandeveer's line when he's facing DeBell's brigade, they took every one of those guns. And there were no guns north of Reedsbridge Road in 1990. In the 1990s, Jim Sikowski and I were able to...
there are some guns up there now.
Yeah, we wrangled by one means or another and got some of those guns, or got some guns to put back there. So, yeah, I've done a lot of things trying to get cannon. So much so that the chief ranger at Kennesaw Mountain, if he knows that or if it's reported that I'm in the park, he sends one of his law enforcement people to keep an eye on it. Because he maintains, and he's not entirely wrong, that I actually stole 2 cannons from them. So it was actually a trade, but I did get 3, and they got 1. We're still short guns. There are other battery positions that no longer are marked in any way. All right.
Yes. Would it be wrong to create replicas? Put them there just so you can...
Right. I don't think there would be a problem with that. I think that would be an acceptable solution. The kind of purist in me might be, okay, let's create some replicas and figure out where this original gun is. We'll put the replica there.
Exactly.
Well, you have already gone and replicated all the carriages, so.
Right. Well, but they were built, with that purpose of being a display carriage. Yes, I would not have a problem with that. Although, I would actually try to get the original guns back. And I think in most cases we know where the guns went. So I think we've been able to keep track of them well enough. Okay.
These cannons all around here are
all of the artillery tubes, the 256 artillery tubes the National Military Park has, all of them are original Civil War artillery pieces.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, only in one case do we know that one of the guns was actually here at the Battle of Chickamauga. There are other guns that we have some wartime history for, but they were not here. They were elsewhere. But we have probably other guns that were here. The record to show that just doesn't exist anymore. The history of each individual artillery piece is mostly unknown. Here and everywhere else.
Which is the one gun that you know?
There is one of the 12-pound field howitzers down at Scott's Tennessee battery site along the horse trail south of Brotherton Road, just on the other side of Alexander Bridge Road. One of those 12-pound field howitzers is the tube that we know. We don't know who had it. We don't even know whether it was Union or Confederate. It's a Northern-made tube, but we don't know. We know it was used in the campaign and battle, but we don't know who had it. It appears on the list of ordnance and ordnance stores shipped south on the Western Atlantic Railroad from Ringgold in October of 1863. And so it might have been in Union hands and captured, but it might have been in Confederate hands earlier. And the Confederate battery upgraded it with one of the captured guns here at Chickamauga and turned that one in to go elsewhere. Okay. Left is the marker to the 33rd. Along here, and what we'll be talking about in just a moment, is going to be young Jacob Parrott, the first man awarded the Medal of Honor, leading his company forward in battle.
33rd Ohio.
The Confederates in the spring of 1863 began to make at Augusta, Macon, and Columbus, Georgia, and which Bragg's army has been getting increasing numbers of throughout the summer of 1863, including a couple of batteries just a couple of weeks before the active phase of the campaign began in August. So there are some Confederate batteries fighting in this battle with brand new guns. The first time they have fired them in anger is here at Chickamauga. And these are products of the Confederate military-industrial complex that has been developed and is still growing in central Georgia and central Alabama. And a number of those guns survive, but they're at Gettysburg today. They were still in use at the end of the war, and so they were put in storage in eastern arsenals. And when the when Chickamauga first, then Antietam, then Shiloh, then Gettysburg, then Vicksburg were created as the first battlefield parks in the 1890s, the War Department sent guns from the closest arsenal to those parks. And so those guns, which had been surrendered in North Carolina, had been put in storage in eastern arsenals, and they went to Gettysburg. But if you go there in the low number 1863 Augusta, Macon, or Columbus Napoleons that you see, they would have been ones that would have been here. All right, now I pause here at the corner of George Winfrey's field. You're looking diagonally across the field here. The field, as I said, is now just about the right size. Through mapping that was done at the time and then additional study when the National Military Park is created in the 1890s, the veterans attempted to record and pass forward to us detailed information on the landscape as it was at the time of the battle. In addition to mapping, one of the things that they did was they marked the corners of the field. Now, unfortunately, a careless tractor operator has broken this field cornerstone, and in fact, the stone that you see there laying there is actually not the stone that was here that he broke off. That, who knows where it is. When I reported that he had broken the stone, he was told to go find the stone that he'd broken off, and so he just went out and found another stone and brought it over here and plopped it down. But the other three for this field do still stand in the other three corners. The field was surrounded by a 5-foot-high split-rail zigzag worm fence. And now, as Scribner is redeploying his brigade, as I said, he redeployed his own regiment, his right front regiment, the 38th Indiana. He redeploys them. They're basically going to extend off from this corner in that direction. And the 10th Wisconsin is beyond them. His two other front regiments, the 33rd Ohio and the 2nd Ohio, they are ordered to face towards the enemy as well. And they are going to wheel towards the south. But wait a minute, as they wheel through the woods and approach the north end of the Winfrey field, they're still not yet facing the south. To face truly to the south, they've got to do what? Come out into the field. Do they want to do that? No. There's cover and concealment at the edge of the woods here. There's that 5-foot-high split-rail zigzag worm fence and the vegetation that has grown up in it. And so the 33rd Ohio here and further down the 2nd Ohio deploys along the edge of the woods. And so Scribner's brigade, the 4 regiments that he eventually gets facing the enemy, his 5th regiment actually goes off towards his left there and gets engaged with the regular brigade. His 4 regiments are actually at an angle to one another. It's not a straight line. They're bent back. And this is where that angle is. I can't do it that way, so you've got the 2nd and 33rd Ohio here and the 38th and 10th Wisconsin in that direction. But they've now deployed right along the edge of the woods, and they look out into the field. And that must have been some sight for those men. Already there's the concern because there's nothing tying in with the left end of the 2nd Ohio. And what had they driven off in that direction? Confederates earlier. And now they've turned to face more southward, and their lone left flank is open. And all of a sudden, what did they see coming out of the woods and into the field in front of them? Confederates. In particular, Edward Carey Walthall's brigade of Mississippians. A brigade that had started out the fight on September the 18th down at Alexander's Bridge. 1,795 men strong. Now they've suffered 105 casualties in the fighting down at Alexander's Bridge on September the 18th. They've had a few other men drop out. They're probably down in the neighborhood of about 1,600 men on the morning of September the 19th. Now they had, while they'd been stopped at Alexander's Bridge, they had marched on further downstream and crossed at Byram's or Lambert's Ford, and had then moved in, and they had moved westward on the morning of the 19th, and they're down on Alexander Vineyard Road. And they're just stopped along the side of the road when all of a sudden, to their north, the sound of this fighting begins. And as it intensifies, and as Confederate commanders up here, Claudius Wilson and Matthew Hector and Nathan Bedford Forrest and William T. Shot Pouch Walker, as they report the need for more troops, this division of Edward Carey Walthall's Mississippi Brigade and Daniel Govan's Arkansas Brigade under St. John R. Liddell is ordered to march to the sound of the guns. Now, as they had marched along Alexander Vineyard Road, they had been marching left in front. They had formed up that morning in their line of battle, and when they left their bivouac area, they had marched out to the left. So the command had been left face, and the men formed then a column of four and marched forward. Now, they were anticipating then that they could then deploy off to the left the way that they would begin the attack down towards Lee and Gordon's Mill. But now, as they have stopped and bivouacked along the road, when they form up again, they happen to be now in line of battle, and they are facing to the north. And basically the command is forward march. And they march up through the woods for more than a mile towards the sound of the guns. They're going to come up from the south, and as I said, unaware of it, they're going to come in on the flank of Baird's division. Walthall's Mississippi Brigade, 5 regiments, probably about 1,600 men that morning in line. And Govan's Brigade, just a little bit smaller, maybe 1,400 or 1,500 men strong off there in that direction, stretched out in a long line. And they come moving northward through the woods. As they do, they're going to capture a doctor, a surgeon, and some men assigned to medical duties. That's Dr. Miller, who was the man who had escaped to give Scribner the warning. How had he escaped the Confederates? The Confederate skirmishers, some Arkansans, who have captured him, he goes to them and says, I'm a doctor. Under the provisions of the Dix Hill Cartel for parole and exchange, you can't capture me. You have to let me go. They believed him. They let him go. And he went and sounded the alarm. Now, the rest of the medical personnel that were with him that they kept. But the doctor, they let go. And they also captured the provost, brigade provost detachment that has been taking the few Confederates that they rounded up, taking them to the rear. They've freed those Confederates. The Confederates now come charging forward, and at the same time, Scribner is attempting to turn. Now, scale is one of the hardest things that I find in trying to relate what happened on this ground to folks. I'd love it if for this program I could have maybe, I don't know, just, maybe about 8,000 living history guys to be able to get them deployed, much like what we are talking about. Hopefully, you'll go see the 23rd Tennessee Living History program today, and maybe while they're doing something in that program, maybe get to a place where you're close enough that all you see to your left or right is that line. And then start trying to magnify that 10, 100, 500, 1,000 times to start getting some scale. I don't know how well this is going to work, but I've tried to do a little bit of that for you as well today. Now, put yourself in the shoes of some of the men of the 33rd Ohio right here. And you're looking across the field, and yes, the Confederates are coming in at an angle to you. Look across the field. And I've tried to mark out, the wind's not helping me out here, but I've tried to mark out part of the front of Walthall's Mississippi Brigade. As you look out right down here, you can see a taller Confederate flag. It's even leaning forward a little bit as if they are advancing towards us. That is the center of the 29th Mississippi. And then the 29th Mississippi's left is over here. We'll see it. Yeah, they're right down there. You can see the flag. That white car is going past it right now. And then the 30th Mississippi is over here, and just a little bit as you view the 29th left, you should be able to see the flag for the 29th right. And then down by the monument to the 15th Ohio, right down here, you can see another Confederate flag. That's the center of the 30th Mississippi. Out here in the field is, the wind has blown my flag off, but the pole without a flag there, that's the center of the 27th Mississippi. Last year, did any of you all go see the movie Free State of Jones?
Yes.
The 27th Mississippi includes a company from Jones County, Mississippi. And in fact, the Confederate major that Newt Knight is almost certainly believed, or almost certain to have killed in Jones County, was the major of the 27th Mississippi. He's not here because he's back in Jones County to round up deserters from that Jones County company of the 27th Mississippi. And that's what will have him in Jones County to then be murdered in October of 1863. And then beyond, right at the edge of the woods, just barely visible, you can probably more likely see the flagpole, but that's the flag of the 24th Mississippi, the right regiment of the brigade. That regiment, as they pass the field, their right is in the woods, their left is in the field. Now, the smaller flags represent the left and right. They would be the markers. Each regiment had a man as a guide on the left and right end of the regimental battle line to help guide it forward. And typically they had a small flag of some sort that they mounted on the bayonet of their rifle. But as we look out here into the field, as a man of the 33rd Ohio might have, we're looking at basically 2.5, or maybe really what we can see from here, we can see 3 of the 5 regiments of Walthall's brigade. That's 1,600 men strong. The brigade continues into the woods there on the right and continues into the woods to the right of the 15th Ohio line. Now, they come forward. The fire of the 2nd Ohio and the 33rd Ohio is going to be sufficient to stop the 29th Mississippi and the 27th Mississippi for a time. But with nothing on the left of the 2nd Ohio, some of the 24th Mississippi guys are going to begin sweeping that way, probably going over the dead animals and the abandoned cannon of Howe's battery as they sweep northward. But what really, again, unhinges Scribner's position is the passage of Confederates beyond the right flank of the 10th Wisconsin. They will be forced to fall back. Then Van Pelt's battery is captured. The 38th Indiana is going to be forced to withdraw as well. Then the 33rd Ohio, and then the 2nd Ohio, driven off to the north in front of this attack by Walthall's and Govan's brigade. And now the Battle of Chickamauga has progressed another half mile or a mile further to the south of where it had been already that morning. And now there's a new sound of the guns for additional troops to march toward. And the battle will continue at midday and into the afternoon, progressing ever further to the south. Questions or observations here?
Yeah, so the fence went all the way around the field,
right? Yes.
So if it was an impediment here, why wouldn't it have been an impediment?
It was an impediment there, although none of the Mississippians seemed to say anything about how the fence might have held them up.
They just knocked it over?
They knocked it over or climbed over it. Also, the ground does drop off a little bit, and in fact, if we were to walk down there, or you could volunteer to go get my flags down there for me. Actually, if you look between the 2 little marker flags down there for the left of the 24th and the right of the 27th, you might be able to see the top of the cast iron tablet for a brigade late in the day. The ground drops off a little bit. So where the fence was is in that lower ground. So they might have been able to climb over it without any real trepidation because it was shielded by the higher ground right here. This also may get to a real timing factor. They may have climbed over the fence and entered the field before the 33rd Ohio and the 2nd Ohio were sufficiently in place to put fire out into the field. Because the Mississippians will relate moving out into the field, stopping, laying down. That was as much as to figure out exactly where they were going, and to give the men a moment to breathe, and then rising up and charging again. And so these men may have climbed over that fence line when there was not a real threat at this point.
And that's all within range of the muskets.
Oh yes, right. Most of these men are armed with 3-band rifled muskets, so this is all easy range here.
Jim,
Yeah.
in my research on the 33rd Alabama, one of the survivors after the war mentioned by the time they got to that corner, several of them put their shoulder
Yep.
to the rails and tore the fence down.
Right. That's
So they were coming up a lot faster and needed to get here quicker.
right. And at that time, there are Federals further out into the field.
Right.
What Sheila's referring to is a memoir of a soldier in Sam Wood's brigade, whose tablet is the one down there, who attacks into this field on the evening of September the 19th. And they're part of Claiborne's division. And according to Matthew or Preston, whichever name he was going under that particular moment, he said that within Claiborne's division, they had practiced a battle drill of, instead of potentially exposing themselves more to enemy fire, to climb over a fence, to rush into the corners of the fence. And about 20 men put their shoulders to the rails, and then all on command push and basically spread the fence out in front of them. Now, why would so many men, go up to the visitor center and look at the stacked rail fence up there? Why would it take 20 men rushing into the corner to push down the fence? Because they didn't have maintenance guys with tractors and weed eaters who insist on mowing the fence lines. The farmers didn't clear the fence lines. They let them grow up. The vegetation growing up in the fence corners is part of what held the fences together. It intertwined in the rails and helped them keep it together. And they become a major obstacle. That's why it took as many as 20 men rushing into each corner to put their shoulders against the fence to push and spread it out in front of them. They had to untangle it amongst all that vegetation.
Would there have been a fence on either side of the road too?
There is no reference to the fence being on either side of the road. What Georgia law talks about is that where a road passed through a field, or where a farmer chose to farm on both sides of a road, he could put a gate across the road. And it was the responsibility of the person using the road to open and then re-secure the gate properly. So there probably was a gate of some sort at the roads. But I've never seen a specific reference to that. But there is no reference to a fence along the roads.
Any idea who killed Van Pelt?
Not for certain. It is Mississippi, some of Walthall's men.
Okay.
Probably, maybe the left of the 29th or the right of the 30th, but we don't know for certain.
They get credit for capturing the batteries?
Yes, but there that you learned a little bit about what happened in this phase of the battle. Action from a little after mid-morning through late morning to approaching noon, as the Battle of Chickamauga grew in intensity, and this aspect of the battle progressing as each unit's southern flank was threatened as that progression began or continued here, and it's going to extend the battle ever further southward during the course of the day. And what Scribner's brigade endured here in the woods is illustrative of what happened multiple times on this battlefield, particularly on September the 19th. I'll be around a couple more minutes to answer any additional questions folks may have. I do appreciate, again, your participating in this program. Hopefully, you will take in some of the other programs. The National Military Park Battery and Starkweather's Brigade are going to be captured. 5 of the 6 guns of Van Pelt are captured. All 6 of Burnham's battery are captured for a time, because Walthall continues off up in that direction and captures them. Particularly when Liddell is flanked out of here, when Cruxton comes in on his left, most of his guys are going to go off this way, which is going to push the Arkansans through the abandoned Van Pelt equipment and some of the abandoned Burnham equipment, which will then allow them to, well, or at least claim capturing guns.
Somebody from Arkansas wouldn't do that.
So you get lots of claims by these guys, and then the commander of the skirmish line of Walthall's brigade there were still apparently 2 serviceable horses from one of the limbers here in Van Pelt's battery, he orders some men to take those horses with that limber and hook it up to one of the guns and take the gun to the rear. The Confederates seem to have also attempted to get other guns off of the field, moving some of them even by hand, but then when Cruxton comes in on Liddell's flank, they have to abandon that, because when Villick comes in here a little bit later on, Villick reports getting some artillery fire directly in his front. There is no Confederate battery there, but Villick will subsequently recapture a couple of Loomis's or Van Pelt's and Bush's 4th Indiana battery guns, which had gotten that far to the south, and the Confederates had actually served them for a short time. So, capturing cannon was big coup. In the Army of Tennessee earns you the right of painting cross cannons inverted on your battle flag.
I think the 8th Arkansas might have claimed that.
I think their cross cannons is based on this capture. And the most assured way to prove to somebody that you have captured enemy cannon would be to have it. And so there are efforts to take these guns to the rear. And so apparently some of Van Pelt's and Bush's guns get down even into this area. And that would be natural, because which way did they come from? They came from that way, so they're going to take them back the way they came. So, which is just the way their wounded are going to get out of here. So when Johnson's division comes in, which includes Villick's brigade, they're going to capture wounded Confederates going to the rear from Liddell's division, going that way. So you can really think of these units as kind of conduits, and things operate along these axes and lines, and that's how they're going to be. Even the wounded are going to be going back.
Would it take a trained crew to fire a captured gun, or could just anybody jump up and fire it?
Well, there is a little bit of cross-training. There are instances where in the wintertime, and it seems mostly to be able to keep these 18 to 25-year-old privates busy doing something, where they will cross-train some infantry to load and fire a cannon, saying, oh, if we capture some enemy cannon in battle, we'll be able to then put them in use. Although I think the real purpose was to simply have something for those 18 to 25-year-old privates to do. And I can't remember in Govan's brigade if there's an account of them doing that in the spring of '63 or not. Yeah, I can't remember. We'd have to quiz Lee and see if he remembers. I don't remember an account of that right off. but it's not that difficult. And simply watching the battery attached to your brigade drill, it would have been easy enough to pick that up and learn it. And both Walthall's and Govan's brigades batteries are following along behind. They're looking for a place to get engaged. So there could even be an artillery guy who came up and who said, "Oh, you grab that, you take that and stick it in the muzzle, and you push it down." And it doesn't take long to train people to become an artillery crew. So it's not terribly technical. So I used to, when the MP school was down at Fort McClellan, and they came and did their staff ride here. I used to train 8 of them to be the crew in about an hour, and that included getting them the jackets that they could wear, and then they did the demonstration for the rest of the class. So, it's not that difficult. Okay. Other questions or observations here? All right. Well, we will head back towards our start.